In this video, we are talking about 10 players that you must start in week 10 of fantasy football. But before we get into it, if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you do end up enjoying. Starting at number 10 with Najee Harris. Who would have thought? Harris is looking like a much better running back than he did last year. He's looking like a guy that wants a new big contract, and he's playing pretty well right now. 3 straight games of 100 plus rushing yards, along with averaging 20 touches, 118 total yards, and 17.5 fantasy points per game over those 3 games, and ranks 4th in red zone touches, 8th in carries, 9th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 14th in explosive run rate. This Steelers offense has looked much better with Russell Wilson now under center, and that just means more touches, more carries for Harris, because we know Wilson isn't going to run the football like Justin Fields did. And while Najee only has 2 touchdowns on the season, I'm expecting him to find the end zone in this one, as the Commanders have allowed the 5th most rushing yards and have surrendered explosive runs at the highest rate this season. So it's looking really good for Najee, for the Steelers offense, in a good matchup where it could be high scoring. So make sure that Harris is in your lineup this week. Moving on to number 9, Kahlil Shakir, who has been a target monster for Josh Allen over the last 3 games, averaging 8 targets per game over that span, 22% target share, 28% first read share, 2.78 yards per route run. Shakir has been one of the better receivers in football this year and is being targeted at the 3rd highest rate among all receivers when facing zone coverage. And the Colts have used zone coverage on 86% of their plays this season, so it's a really good spot for Shakir. And every single week, when they utilize Kahlil on this offense, good things happen. And they're going to need a lot of him in week 10 with Keon Coleman out due to a wrist injury, and Amari Cooper also dealing with a hand wrist injury. He's questionable right now. So if Cooper is also out, it's just, there's no other way to put it. They're going to have to throw the football to Shakir a lot. Dalton Kincaid is probably going to be involved in the passing game as well, but you just want to start him on sheer volume at this point. And we know when Shakir has the ball in his hands, he can make plays. I just think it's going to be a very big week for the talented receiver, as the Colts rank in the top 10 in yards allowed to wide receivers this season. Moving on to number 8, Tyrone Tracy Jr. Yes, he was in the start video for us last week, and it didn't pan out. But that is not a good reason to go away from Tracy this week. Keep playing him, because he is the guy in this Giants backfield. Even with a healthy Devin Singletary, as he's earned at least 60% of snaps in every game since week 5, along with 22 touches in week 8, 17 touches in week 9. The Giants really like this kid, and they're going to continue to feed him the football because he doesn't give them any reason to take him off the field. He's just been really good, as he ranks 8th in explosive run rate, 21st in missed tackles forced per attempt, and leads all rookie running backs in rushing yards, runs of 10 plus yards, and runs of 20 plus yards. This is a special back that's just getting started and is looking like he's going to be a league winner the second half of the year. So hopefully you drafted him or picked him up earlier on in the season off the waiver wire. And Tracy is in a smash spot this week against the horrible Carolina Panthers run defense, who have allowed the most fantasy points per game to the position. So get Tracy in your lineup. Throw away last week. No, he didn't have a big game, but he's going to go crazy in week 10. On to our next guy, and that is Ladd McConkey, another guy who we thought was going to capitalize off that big performance the previous week, where I believe he had 29 fantasy points, and then last week still had a nice serviceable game, but wasn't a blowout performance. Stick with Ladd, because he's clearly the #1 receiver on this Chargers offense, and LA is cooking right now with Justin Herbert at the helm. This is something, not to toot our own horn, but we talked about it this offseason. We said we knew that Ladd McConkey was going to be the #1 option on this offense. We didn't know it was going to be this good of a unit, but he was going to be the #1 receiver attached to Justin Herbert, and we know how good of a quarterback Herbert is. So good things were going to happen, and that's exactly what's happening. Ladd is playing really well, and Ladd is also extremely talented. He's a really good rookie. He plays like a veteran at this point. He's explosive, he's quick, he's a fantastic route runner, and he leads the team in first read share at 25% since their bye week. It's clear and obvious that the Chargers want to get him more and more involved as the weeks go on and is averaging 7 targets and 14.6 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. And Ladd ran 94% of the routes in week 9. He's not leaving the field now that the Chargers have turned into this pass-happy offense, which kind of has come to a surprise to me, but a really good surprise. They want to win football games with Justin Herbert, who is their best player on offense. Instead of getting in these, play good defense, run the football matchups, they're like, no, we're going to blow you out in the first half, and then we'll run the football. From week 6 to 9, the Chargers rank 4th in neutral pass rate, and it's paying off. They've won 3 out of their last 4 games. And the matchup this week against the Titans is very beatable through the air. It's hard to run on Tennessee, but you can throw on them, as they've given up the 6th most fantasy points per game to slot receivers. So keep sticking with Ladd. He's seeing the volume. He's seeing the usage. Big days are coming for the very talented rookie receiver. On to number 6, raAndre Stevenson. The Patriots have finally decided to give Stevenson the workhorse usage that he deserves. Stop giving Antonio Gibson the football. He's not good. And over raAndre's last 2 games, 75% of the snaps, 78% of the rush attempts, 19 touches per game, along with 23 fantasy points over that 2-game stretch. It's been really nice for Stevenson, and a lot of his success has been because of Drake May, who has been a huge lift for this entire Patriots offense and for raAndre's fantasy value and production, as Stevenson has scored 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games. And yes, I'll admit, raAndre has not been very efficient on the ground at all, but he's still ranking 14th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 15th in yards after contact per attempt, and should have a nice day in week 10 against the Bears, who are allowing the 12th most fantasy points per game to running backs, along with the 5th highest explosive run rate. And while Stevenson's yards per carry haven't been great, I do think they improve. I do think he continues to score touchdowns because Drake May is playing really good football. They're able to move the ball on offense, putting them in scoring position, and Stevenson is capitalizing on that. So it might not feel great. It might feel kind of gross, but keep Stevenson in your lineup. He's going to continue to play well and score touchdowns. At number 5, Deebo Samuel hopefully is fully healthy at this point, coming off that bye week, and has gone over 70 plus scrimmage yards in 5 out of 6 full games played, along with the 29% target share and 41% first read share in week 8, which was his first game with no Brandon Ayuk. And I expect that trend to continue this week, even with CMC expected to return. McCaffrey likely only helps Deebo. He's going to open up the field for everyone on this 49ers offense, which is going to lead to those big explosive plays that we know Samuel is capable of. We haven't seen a ton of it this year, but this offense hasn't been great overall. And Deebo has been dealing with a bunch of different injuries. Hopefully it's different for him the second half of the year. And I'm expecting this contest against the Bucs to be high scoring. We saw what Tampa Bay did last week against the Chiefs, even with no Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Baker Mayfield, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator for Tampa Bay, is absolutely cooking right now. It doesn't matter who's on the football field. They're going to put up points, and that's going to be the case even against San Francisco this week. And this Tampa Bay secondary is very beatable, as they've allowed the 7th most fantasy points to receivers this season. And while it hasn't been great overall for Deebo owners, you can't bench him at this point. His upside is too high. He's a guy that could put up 100 total yards and 2 touchdowns at any point. At number 4, James Cook should get back on track in week 10, with Buffalo potentially down their top 2 wide receivers in Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper. You could argue Kahlil Shakir is a top 2 receiver. However you want to say it, they're going to be potentially down 2 receivers, so they're going to have to rely on other guys on offense, which is why we think Shakir is going to have a big game, and I think Cook is going to benefit from it as well. And even though Buffalo has turned to more of a pass-happy offense as of late, it hasn't really hurt Cook that bad, as he continues to be involved in the passing game. 9 targets over his last 2 games. He's caught 8 of those, which is nice to see, especially if you are in a PPR league. Yes, Cook overall has cooled off a little bit after a really strong start to the year, but he continues to score touchdowns at a really high rate, as he's already hit pay dirt 8 times this year. That is a career high. The knock on Cook coming into the season was he can't score touchdowns, and now he is doing that. So for the most part, if you are a Cook owner, you are pretty happy, along with scoring double-digit fantasy points in 6 out of 8 games this season. The matchup is also very favorable this week, as the Colts have allowed 150 rushing yards per game. And most likely Buffalo is going to be blowing out the Colts early. So who are they going to lean on? Their running game. It's going to be a lot of James Cook. I'm sure Ray Davis is going to be involved. They're going to have full command of this game. I don't think it's going to be a shootout against Indianapolis unless Joe Flacco somehow comes out of the gate hot, because we know they looked horrible last week against Minnesota. So it could happen. It could be high scoring. And if it is, James Cook is still going to have a big game on the ground and potentially through the air. I'm expecting over 100 total yards and a touchdown for Cook in week 10. At number 3, George Pickens looks like a completely different receiver with Russell Wilson now under center, as he's averaging 92 receiving yards and 16.8 fantasy points per game over the last 2 games, along with earning an impressive 26% target share, 34% first read share, and a whopping 44% of the team's air yards. Those are really good numbers. Even with Mike Williams now coming into town, it's still going to be the Pickens show when the Steelers want to throw the football. And Pickens' numbers, honestly, at this point should be a lot bigger if it wasn't for all those yellow flags on the ground, on the field, on the turf. Every time it felt like Pickens made a big play or scored a touchdown, there was a penalty and it was called back. So nonetheless, Pickens could be going crazy right now with Wilson under center, but the refs have gotten in the way a little bit. I think that George is going to have a monster second half of the year. He was a guy that I think you should have probably traded for while he was on bye, because he is going to go crazy the next 8 or so games. It needs to be started in week 10 against the Commanders, who have ranked 17th in fantasy points per game allowed to receivers. So continue to start George with confidence. In those 100+ receiving yards, 1 to 2 touchdown games are coming. At number 2, Brock Purdy, with the band nearly back together at this point, minus Brandon Ayuk. Purdy is going to go crazy, especially this week. He should thrive throwing the football, as he has some of the best weapons in the NFL. We know this. Deebo, Kittle, CMC's most likely going to be back. Juwan Jennings is a nice player and has scored 20+ fantasy points in 3 straight games. A lot of that has been due to his rushing production. He's been running the football, and he's been doing it pretty well, as he has 3 touchdowns on the ground over his last 2 weeks. That might not continue with Christian back in the lineup, but who knows? It may. But don't let that fool you, as Brock is still one of the better passers of the football in the NFL, as he ranks 3rd in yards per attempt, 4th in passing yards per game, 11th in fantasy points per dropback. And this game should be a high-scoring affair. We already talked about it when we mentioned Deebo against the Bucs, who have a horrible secondary, but they still have a good offense under Baker. And I think this 49ers offense, with everyone back, is going to just go nuts. They're going to put up a lot of points like we are accustomed to seeing from this offense. And the Bucs have allowed the 3rd most passing yards and touchdowns, along with the 2nd most fantasy points per game to the position. So Purdy has been kind of rocky throughout the year, but he's caught absolute fire as of late and needs to be started in week 10. And at number 1, Josh Downs didn't have that type of game that we were all hoping for and expecting with Joe Flacco back under center. But that doesn't mean that you take Downs out of your lineup, because he's still seeing nice volume, 9 targets in each of his last 2 games, and is still averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. We know at this point that Josh is the wide receiver 1 for the Colts and Flacco's favorite target at this point, as he's earned a 27% target share, 33% first read share. And with Michael Pittman Jr. out this week due to a back injury, Downs is going to be heavily targeted in this one, and the Colts are going to be chasing points against that potent Buffalo offense. It is tough to throw on the Bills, but you can beat them from the slot, as they've allowed the 6th most yards to slot receivers this season. And we know Downs plays from the slot. I think he really bounces back after last week. And last week wasn't a bad game either. I believe he still had 6 catches for over 60 yards. He didn't get into the end zone. That changes in week 10. I think he goes over 100 receiving yards and a score. So wasn't awesome last week, but make sure that you are starting him in a really good matchup and negative game script, where the Colts are going to have to be throwing a lot if they want to have a chance to beat the Buffalo Bills. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you could please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.